It is Sunday, the 22nd of December 2019, and welcome to this episode of Code Evolution. So, it's been a great time for .NET developers, and we're in an era of .NET Core 3.1, .NET Standard 2.2. We now have async streams, we have nullable reference types. There's so many great features that have come out in just even a few months. And I have to say, I'm actually quite happy with it. The thing I wanted to do is kind of introduce people, especially, since I've been actually upgrading a lot of my projects, libraries to have nullable reference support. We're going to talk about that today. So nullable is nullable reference types are very easy to enable. I really think they did this smartly. It's very much in the kin of TypeScript's strict null checks, but there's some variance on being able to say, oh, well, what's the default behavior? Here we have an instance where I've actually done this twice. I'm going to take it out here, and we're going to say it's right here. So there's the nullable reference enable. And that's all you have to do within your project to enable nullable reference support is just put nullable and then put the word enable. And what that's going to do is for anything that was not already annotated with nullable reference support with a question mark where it should be nullable, which we'll show you here in a minute, it just treats it as if it's not supposed to be null. So you kind of get into this thing where you have to do some work to get it to work right. So in this case, we have this class that I have where at some point you can see here it takes in a channel reader, and in this case it expects it to. Let me go ahead and hide this for you guys, give you a little more room. Here we go. It expects the channel reader to not be null. Now that said, the guidance for nullable reference types is really that it's just a compiler optimization that kind of helps you discover where you might have a nullable reference, and it's awesome. But you still should, from a public API standpoint, you need to still check against null. So if you're using anything like some of the analyzers or even like fxcop, all that stuff, it'll give you a lot of assistance in making sure that you check for null. But don't just disregard, especially when it comes to public APIs. Don't disregard the null checks because someone else could be using a different version, or maybe they have null, some sort of different null reference checking that is maybe not as good as yours, and so you still have to kind of check against it. And it's just good practice. So it doesn't save you 100% against nulls, but it does help a lot. It helps immensely. So in this case here, for example, you'll see that where I'm setting buffer equal to null, I'm actually going to take away the question mark, and you'll see that the compiler will now warn me that, hey, dude, you can't set this to null because it's not supposed to be null. It's just a warning. You can upgrade the warnings to actual errors. And, I don't necessarily recommend that, but it is a nice feature for people who want to have a little bit more compilation kind of checking. I wouldn't even be opposed to it, but I think for the most part, the warnings are great. Just having the warnings allow you to take a look and kind of work your way through it. Now, that said, what if you get into a situation where you don't want to concern yourself with this null reference checking? Well, let's go down here to this method here, which is it's part of the channel reader for try read. Now, when you're reading, when you're doing a try read, it has an out parameter, okay? And now you'll see here that there's this. It's a null. I think it's what's called a null forgiving operator. I forgot the exact term, but basically it's kind of like saying, hey, even though this is not supposed to be allowed, right? So if an item here is not referenced as being null, like if I put this as being null, it's fine, right? You see that? But again, this gets into another set of issues. The thing is that default being null should be allowed. When we're talking about out, if you can't just always be not null. You want a Boolean that says returns true if it's successful and you false if it's not. And so you still need to actually set the value. So the way to get around this is to simply just say, hey, look, don't worry about it, right? And so you can put this, null forgiving or whatever null ignoring operator at the end, and it's just a way of just kind of saying, hey, I am asserting that what you're telling me, that don't worry about it. This will be good. And this is very similar to what you'll see in TypeScript as well. TypeScript follows the same kind of pattern of, hey, just let me assert that everything's okay here. Now that said, you're kind of probably going, wait a minute. Well, then this could be null, even though it says that it shouldn't be null. So that's a problem, right? Well, there's a solution for that. Now, first of all, in this particular project, I have both .NET Standard 2 and 2.1. So, I think going forward, I think some things will probably just go with 2.1 explicitly. But let's say if I am set to 2.1, and that's the only case where you would have any nullable reference support anyway, you can do something where you can annotate and say specifically for try read, you can say not null when true. Okay, and then it's going to give me a way to import that. And here we go. So this not null when true is a better way to kind of indicate to the compiler or the analysis tools that, hey, this thing could be null basically when it's not true, but it's not null when true, right? So that's kind of a simple way of guaranteeing that this isn't an issue. And I like that there's a lot of these little things. Another one that's important as well is for certain return types. So let's say, for example, our return, we'll just mock up a method here that says, let's say, public, and we'll say that it's like, what do we got here? T out, for example. We'll do another T out, and something like take or whatever. Okay. Well, the thing about this is, and then we'll just say for right now, we're just so we get rid of the error, we're gonna return default. Okay, just to make it go away. Don't worry about the contents, but the important part is, what if we have a type parameter that we can't assert whether or not it's a nullable type, but we do know, or we know at least in our API for a fact, that it will never be returned as null. And the way to assert that through annotations is return not null. Again, we're going to kind of import this again here. Oops, sorry. And that actually, when it comes to certain things, will actually do the trick. Now, if you already have, obviously, if you've already set up certain things to, in your typing, maybe it's, for example, like if this was a string, okay, then this is going to be unnecessary because you're already asserting from this, being that a string is a reference type, you're already asserting by the fact that this doesn't have a question mark that it's going to be not null. But in the case of type parameters, for example, you need to do something else if that's what you want to do. This actually is subtly helpful. If, say, something downstream, you were concerned about, when you call the take method, if whether it's going to work or not, or whether you want to, you want to assert outwardly that the contract will be guaranteed to be not null, and that's a great way to work with it. Another thing you can do too is, I think, is it maybe null, right? So maybe null is an option as well, and depending on how you think about it. So that's also the case. But again, this is not something that most people are going to be dealing with. Turn off my thing here. This is not, what most people are going to be dealing with, but it's just an example of what's possible with nullable references. So that's pretty much it. I really didn't want to go too deep into it. I just wanted to introduce people that it's really not that hard. Converting from a project that did not have nullable enable to nullable enable is actually, it's not that hard. It's just fine. So strongly suggest that people, look into this and see, where things are at and how they are. I'm really enjoying the fact that now a lot of my null problems kind of go away, but I also have to admit that it hasn't been super dramatic in a sense of better. Where it really gets to be better is when you create a library or some sort of code and you enable nullable. It's the downstream effects that are the most dramatic, right? When someone tries to do something and you're already automatically annotated, or you've annotated things, and they automatically get that kind of null checking. We're saying, hey, dude, you're about to pass something null that's not supposed to be null. And it gives them a better choice, right? They have more choice around how they want to deal with, that kind of thing. In some cases, what I'll end up doing is I might pass a parameter. Let's see if I can give an example anywhere. Let's say, for example, if upstream of this constructor or something like that, I might have something that could be null, okay? In other words, let's say the source going in could be a null value. And for me, what I'll do is I'll end up asserting with the error, I'll use some sort of, I'll basically say that this parameter is allowed to be null. And then because this does the null checking for me, that's where the actual, the actual runtime assertion will occur. It'll occur inside the constructor. And that's okay too, right? As long as you're doing this, as long as you're not relying on the compiler assistance. You're relying on runtime checking where it needs to be, and then you can still have a little more lax experience in your code. So that'll wrap it up. Again, this was just a super quick video. I've been doing a lot of work around getting Nullable references integrated into all my code, and it's been great. I'll find the little things here and there that I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that. I need to fix that. I've had cases where it'll change how I want the code to be written. I might throw more on nulls than I would have before, instead of silently failing or returning null. There's less. I have a less likelihood of wanting to return things null now, so that's another good thing. So, jump on it, try it. It's not that hard. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe you have a huge code base, but still, I think it's worth checking out. So. Have a great day and happy coding.